Okay, while we are waiting for a few others to come by, I think there's a few people coming. I'd like to welcome you all to Yayasan Satu Malaysia, also this building is Just Work. The other side is Yayasan Satu Malaysia. So it's split into two. It seems that our chairman is also the president of Just Work, so we always compliment each other. We are brothers and sisters. So welcome again to the public forum entitled the 30th General Election and Future of the Nation. Of course, everybody is aware, everybody is so eager, and especially people out there still talking about PRU13. There are so many perceptions and accept reality. So many perceptions, accept reality. So we are hoping that we can come up with some sort of information today, sharing with each other, so as we can disseminate the information to the general public. Maybe you can create another forum, sub-forum, within your vicinity and your area of expertise or whatnot, so as we can pursue further on the issue of the 13th general election and future of the nation. May I start with thanking Just Work for giving us the space here today, and thanking the staff especially for helping us today, and of course our team members from Yayasan Satu Malaysia. Let me begin by introducing the panel. We have two panels here. Of course, it's all familiar faces here, even the audience and the panel themselves. Okay, we have Professor Emeritus Datuk Dr. Shad, Saleem Faruqi. He's presently serving as legal advisor for University Technology Mara UiTM, which is my university when I did my first degree. Okay, and the second panel is our beloved Dr. Chandra Muzaffar. He's our chairman of Yayasan Satu Malaysia, and he's also the president of Just Work. Of course, we'll go straight forward to Professor Datuk Dr. Shad to begin with his presentation, and he has a PowerPoint slide, I guess, and I hand over to you, Prof. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to confine myself as far as possible to the law, but of course law is connected with philosophy at one end and with politics on the other. So it's almost impossible not to trespass into the other fields. Let me begin by saying that elections are democracy's showcase event, but as happens in life, there is often a wide gap between the promise of the law and the sordid realities on the ground. This is a worldwide phenomenon. I think in many countries, elections are democracy's failed dream. If you really look deep into the electoral process, India is, for example, touted as the biggest democracy in the world. Basically, voting is on caste lines. Certainly in many of the states like Uttar Pradesh, it's basically on caste lines. So let's be in that sense, a bit realistic. An exercise as huge as elections is bound to have some questions, complaints, and objections. I'm a teacher. I maintain an attendance list of about 90 students. I find it very difficult to maintain. There will always be some students signing on behalf of somebody else, or signing in advance. If I had to maintain a list of 13.2 million voters, I think there are lots of problems, lots of challenges. Let me look at some of the pre-election issues. Election day issues, post-election issues, very quickly, the legal perspective. First of all, the issue of constituency delineation and the principle of one person, one vote, one value. We have an article on equality before the law, Article 8, and in a way Article 8 would apply even to the electoral process. However, let's not get carried away about the issue that each person should be treated alike. I think it is reasonable to demand that territory should also be taken note of. The population of Sarawak is almost the population of Perak. But look at the territory of Sarawak. Sarawak brings to Malaysia almost as much area as the whole of West Malaysia combined. Almost. Slightly lesser, but almost. Sarawak also has oil. Sarawak also has so many other resources. I don't think it's fair to give to Sarawak the same number of MPs in Parliament as you give to Perak. Selangor has twice the population of Sarawak, but obviously in terms of territory, there is still the same disparity. So I think some scope for geography, even other factors, is quite legitimate to take note of. The difficulty or problem I find with our law is this, that the body drawing up these constituency lines was meant to be independent and separate in 1957. Sadly, due to subsequent changes, that independence was compromised in some respects. In 1962, 63, 84, the Election Commission now merely draws up the recommendations, submits them to the PM, who then drafts an order, submits it to the House of Representatives, the Dewan Rayat, and basically the Dewan Rayat now is the final authority on electoral boundaries. I think that's, to me, objectionable. There should have been independence of the Election Commission maintained, and there should of course be more transparency in why the Election Commission draws up constituencies in one way or the other. For example, in my article in the Star, I pointed out that Putrajaya has only 15,000, whereas Kampar has 144,000, 9 times difference. But then I was not aware of the Election Commission's reasoning. Once I read that, I am prepared to accept. Election Commission said, we have to separate Putrajaya as a separate constituency. We can't combine Putrajaya with anything else. And it so happens Putrajaya happens to be small because it's a federal territory. So I think more openness would help us to understand the difficulties and the problems under which they work. But of course they also will have to explain in some areas clearly the disparity is too much, or both areas seem to be rural areas and yet one area is very large and one is small. I think we need to talk to each other on this issue. Then universal adult franchise. Adult in Malaysia means 21. I personally think that's a little bit too high. With universal education, literacy rate 90%, internet available, I think keeping people waiting till 21 may be too high for a number of reasons. One is this, that it's not 21 on the date of voting, it's 21 on the date of registration. So actually, if my son registered 2 years ago when he turned 21, he got to vote at age 23. So that's quite remarkable. And you know, if you look at the data, nearly 45 to 50% of the population gets disqualified from voting because of the fact that 45 to 50% is below 21. And if you were to add the 23 or 24 factor, that would make it worse. Add to that further, registration is not automatic. Actually, about 35% of the population takes part in elections. When you draw a big circle, leave out 50% below 21 or below 23. Some don't register, some don't show up. All in all, about 35% of the population is taking part in elections. Now, that is a little bit troublesome. We need to expand this. I'm not saying this is cheating and all, no. What I'm saying is that this is not quite right. We need to expand that part of the pie that actually takes part in our electoral exercise. Then integrity of the electoral process, electoral roll. Actually the process is quite consultative. They exhibit it, you are allowed to object, and then they go back, they prepare a second report. It is fairly consultative and open. The only problem is this, that there is no external review. Once the Election Commission has finalized the list, even the court cannot interfere. So the electoral list is the final. There was a recent case where someone in London said, I never registered. How come my name is on the list? Who put it? So he wants his name deleted. He wants to go to court, and the court said no. Once the list is gazetted, the list is final. So here again, I think the issue is not the process in which they do it. The process is quite open, quite consultative. It's the fact that once the list is gazetted, it is final and no review is possible. Then another issue of constitutional law would be equal access to the media, especially those parts of our media that are owned by the public or by the government from the taxpayers' money. I can understand TV3 and TV7 and others saying what they want to say, because they have a board of directors, they have someone owning them. But TV1, TV2, surely they need to be a little bit more fair here in terms of giving access to the media. And bear this in mind that giving access to access in the media to everyone, giving access to people does not necessarily put them in the best light. Sometimes actually their weaknesses may be exposed. I'm reminded of a joke in the USA when Reagan was contesting the presidency. He was of course a former actor, and in order to be very equal, they removed all his films and TV programs. They don't want to show because that would be favoring him. Reagan was a Republican. Actually the Democrats protested. They want his films to be shown. They want people to know what a third-rate actor he was. So giving people a chance to put their foot in their mouth, either to bring out their best or bring out their worst, actually may work both ways. So I think TV1, TV2 should change their policies on this issue. Electoral financing, we of course have clear-cut rules that there are ceilings on expenditure so that elections don't become converted into an exercise in checkbook, a checkbook exercise. 200,000 for federal, 100,000 for state. However, the weakness of the law is this, that individual candidates have ceilings, but parties don't have ceilings. So if I contest, if it's my name on the poster, then of course it counts within my 100,000 or 200. But if I simply put Datuk Sri Najib's picture on the poster and not mine, then it's party expense, it's not my expense, and it doesn't come within mine. And there is very little regulation of political donations, for example, from public corporations. In some countries like the USA, a public corporation, a GLC, cannot give donations for elections because that is basically using taxpayers' money. So I think we need to develop in this area, but then here again, let's have a sense of balance. 50 years, 55 years is not a long time in the life of a nation. We are progressing in the right direction, but of course, all this needs to be looked into, and in reforms are always a journey, never a destination. The campaign period has limits now. I think its minimum is 11 days, though they allowed 15. Personally speaking, the campaign lasted 4 years plus. A lot of us were just fed up. I'm sure you were fed up. There was just too much politics all along. So with internet and all these days, and all these Facebooks and all, I think these things are all not of very great significance how many days there is. Freedom of speech, assembly and association. Article 10 of the Constitution permits us to have free speech, assembly, association, except on grounds specified in the Parlembagan, public order, national security, incitement to an offence, etc. There is now a Peaceful Assembly Act 2012, which actually is, despite all its vilification, actually it is a tremendous improvement over the Police Act, Section 27. Under the Police Act, everything was prohibited unless it was permitted. Now everything is permitted unless it is prohibited. There is some change in the sense that previously you could not march, you could not hold any meeting unless you got a police permit. Now actually you do not require a police permit, you have to give them a notice of 10 days, and if they don't respond, then silence is deemed consent. And their response cannot be an outright no. There is no right on the part of the police anymore to say no. All that they can do is to impose conditions to say, not here, but there, this time. They can impose some conditions. And these conditions are subject to judicial review. I know there have not been that many cases because the law is quite new. Nevertheless, judicial review is possible. But the Peaceful Assembly Act obviously has some limitations. I myself criticize it a little bit, but on the other hand, it is an improvement over the Police Act, previous Police Act, Section 27. The nomination process, at one time, I don't know if you will remember, at one time in Sabah, during Tun Mustafa's, should I say, reign, not just, he was almost like the Sultan of Sulu, isn't it? At one time during his tenure in Sabah, each and every opposition candidate was disqualified. Each and every opposition candidate was disqualified on some technical ground. I noticed this year nobody was disqualified. So I think the nomination process has certainly improved a great deal. Though of course there are always structural issues, systemic issues which one can always raise. Even if a law was framed in heaven, I'm sure we could find some fault with it. For example, there is a question of deposit. And some people say deposits mean the poor are disadvantaged, or those who are not backed by a political party or organization, they have to fork it out from their pocket. So, nevertheless, there are good reasons for some deposit to be paid. Okay, postal voters, advanced voters, we have to allow them. Diplomats, this year there was an improvement in that overseas people were allowed to register, so sadly not many registered. Advanced voters, surely the EC workers, 235,000 workers actually were recruited to work for the elections. You have to allow them advanced voters because on that day, perhaps on the day before, they are busy with the work. Now, election day issues. This is again a systemic problem, structural problem. We have a simple plurality winner-take-all system as opposed to the various proportional representation systems. There are several of them. Our system basically works like this. If there are 222 MPs, there will be 222 constituencies, so single-member constituencies. Unlike in some proportional representation systems where constituencies are quite large, geographically, they may have 10 to 15 MPs from one constituency. And then when the vote is taken, if you got 40% of the vote, you'll get 40% of the 10 seats. You'll get 4 seats. If you got 20%, you'll get 20% of the 10 seats. We don't have that. We have a winner-take-all system, whereby if I got, there's 2 candidates, I got 50,001 vote, and Professor Muzaffar got 49,999. I win. I win and he gets nothing. So it's a winner-take-all because it's just one seat. Sadly, what happens is this situation recurs in many constituencies. The winner wins narrowly, The loser loses narrowly, but he loses and he wins. And so therefore at the national level, there is always a disproportionality between votes obtained and seats won. The Liberal Party in the UK every time wins 18 to 22% of the popular vote and something like 2% of the seats in the House of Commons, because it doesn't have that magical X factor. I don't know how to call it. A particular factor whereby people will vote for you because they are familiar with you, or because they trust you, or for whatever reason. So the Liberal Party collects a lot of vote all over the nation, but doesn't collect enough seats. They've always asked for reform, but reform will not come because the Labour Party and the Conservative Party benefit from the present system. And by the way, this system doesn't only benefit the ruling party, it benefits regional parties. The Sabah Sarawak parties on national vote, they don't get much national vote if you compare it on a nation basis. But for their vote only in their own state, the number of seats they collect is incredible. Sabah Sarawak together actually have 56 plus 1, if you count Labuan, 57. But popular vote of Sabah Sarawak is much lesser than the popular vote of PAS or the popular vote of, let us say, MIC or MCA, but yet they collect a very large chunk. So this system of winner take all, simple plurality, actually does have some very unsatisfactory, undemocratic features, but its great merit is that it produces a winner. In the proportional representation system, there is a large number of political parties because they jumped into the fray hoping to get 10%, having 10% seats. So no one has a majority. In Italy, if the government lasts 1 year or 2 years, that's quite remarkable. I understand Italy since World War II has had something like 35 or 36 governments since World War II, because governments just don't last very long. So that's the problem in life as in law. Sometimes you choose not the best system, you choose the lesser of the two evils. And the proportional representation system is much more democratic, but it leads to instability. In much of Asia, we don't use proportional representation. We go for the first past the post, a simple plurality system. The indelible ink issue was used. Actually, no law requires it. This is an administrative practice, and no seat will be declared illegal just because the ink came off. The phantom voters, maybe those who were dead or who were non-citizens or who were repeat voters, they voted many times. I think that would be clearly election fraud, and if there is any evidence, it should be taken to the courts. Treating or bribery, electoral fraud are the election offences, clearly are a matter which can be taken to court. But of course, bear this in mind that the courts are not obliged to hold an election null and void unless the court is satisfied that the malpractice caused the election result to be affected. So courts have a fair amount of discretion, and the court has also discretion to either declare the loser as the winner, declare my election null and void, and say actually it's number 2. I'm presuming that I would be able to beat you. I won't be able to. I'm just giving it out. So if I have number 1 and you're number 2 and my election is declared null and void, the court can actually say the number 2 then wins the seat, or the court can order a seat to be vacant. Then it's up to the election commission to decide when the new election will be held. Now clearly, when it comes to treating and bribery, the incumbent parties everywhere in the world have some inherent advantages because they can promise all sorts of development plans. On the other hand, actually, the other side can also promise development plans and say, we'll abolish tolls, we'll reduce income tax. So both sides can promise. Strictly speaking, in both cases it's treating and it's a form of bribery. The courts, however, have said making electoral promises is not forbidden by the law. It's if you give actual advantage or money, that would be an offence under the Election Offences Act. The impartiality, openness and transparency of the counting process. I have myself had the privilege, I will tell you why, I have actually accompanied some EC officers as an observer in a few constituencies, and as far as I can see, the voting process is quite transparent. The ballot papers are emptied on the table, the party representatives are sitting there, the ballot paper is opened, it is shown like this, and then only it is put in the right tray. So I think the process is quite open. Now I come to post-election issues. I'll just take 5 more minutes. I have already talked about this disproportionality. Another factor for this disproportionality is in multi-cornered contests. Let's say 3 candidates, 1, 2, 3. You got 40% of the vote, you got 35, and you got 25. 40% wins. But actually 60% voted against him or didn't like him. But he can say, I am the Wakil Rai. Even though, but that's the way the system is. We don't insist in our system, which we also have in the UK, in India, we don't insist that the winner must have 50% plus 1. All that is required is simple plurality. In other words, the largest number of votes. In 3, okay, it is 40, 35, 25. Sometimes there will be 6 candidates. In one constituency, there were 6 candidates. It's technically possible to have, 20% popular vote and be the winner and say, I represent the Raya. So I think that's the problem of disproportionality. Is not a matter of tampering with things. It's a systemic problem. There's a recurring problem in parliamentary democracies that the party forming the government sometimes gets lesser popular votes but more parliamentary seats. In Malaysia we have had 2 instances. In 1969 actually the alliance did not really get more than 50% of the vote, but of course they formed the government, and of course this year Yayasan received 47.3 popular votes, 60% of the seats. Pakistan Raj received 50.8% of the popular vote, but only 40% of the seats. May I please point out to you that this is not a problem unique to Malaysia. Actually, it has happened in the UK many times. In 1951, Conservative Party had 47.9% of the popular vote. Labour had 49% of the popular vote, but it was the Conservative Party that formed the government because it had more seats in the Commons. In 1974, the Labour Party had more seats. Would you believe only 37% of the popular vote? Labour Party came to power with 37% of the popular vote, but majority of the seats in the House of Commons. So sadly, this problem of lesser popular vote than your opponent, but more seats, does happen. In the American presidential election, it can happen. Mr. Gore got the popular vote, but lost out on the electoral college, and that's the way it is. There have been at least 3 or 4 other instances where that happened. So these are problems of systemic problems. They are not really problems of cheating. Another recurring problem is that in parliamentary systems, sometimes the party that forms the government gets less than 50% of the popular vote. So you are not really the first choice of the voters. You have less than 50% of the popular vote, and yet actually, since you have seats in the House, you are not chosen because of popular vote, you are chosen because of seats in the Dewan Raya. And in England, as I mentioned to you earlier, you can form the government of the day on 37% of the popular vote. Next one is judicial adjudication of election disputes. The law has improved here. It has improved in the sense that at one time the High Court had the final decision, now appeal can lie in a federal court. Appeal can lie. However, the courts are reluctant to interfere. Last election 2008, there were 29 election challenges, only one succeeded. Filing of financial returns, every candidate has to submit his returns, otherwise that is also an electoral malpractice, for which the election can be overturned. Party hopping. Luckily, up to now, we have not had any party hopping. I was worried before the election that if things are very close, then there will be lots of Mr. I Ram and Gai Ram. This is a statement from India in the state of Punjab. One legislative assemblyman crossed floors, I'm told, 8 times in 5 years. So I Ram means Mr. Ram is I, coming. Gai Ram is Mr. Ram is going. Mr. Ram was coming and Mr. Ram was going. Fortunately, we haven't had that right now, but of course, last election in Perak it happened. But I have to say, Sabahans are the champion hoppers. We have to give credit where credit is due. At the next ASEAN Games, I think we should send Sabahans.
Guinness Book.
Yes,
They get the Guinness Book record.
Guinness Book of Records. So I'm glad it didn't happen, but of course there is still a possibility. Marches, gatherings, protests, they are allowed. They are allowed under the Peaceful Assembly Act. But you have to give a notice of 10 days. Then there was this very embarrassing issue, perhaps to the government, of senators were appointed as ministers, even though they had not taken the oath in the Senate. I may be wrong in the law here. I personally think there is a confusion between appointment as senator by the young Dipertonagong and taking the oath in the Senate. The Prime Minister, as far as I know, has not taken his oath in the Dewan Rayat yet. No member of the Dewan Rayat appointed to the cabinet has taken his oath in the Dewan Rayat, because Dewan Rayat hasn't met as yet. So I think we must separate your appointment as a senator by the young Dipertonagong and your taking of oath which entitles you or disentitles you from sitting in the Dewan Negara. So I think all these 5 people who were appointed as senators from the appointed senators, I think they are validly appointed to this cabinet, but they cannot sit in the Dewan Negara till they raise their hand and take the oath. And of course, Karpal Singh talked about reform or abolition of the Senate, and it's a very, very big issue. I think all of us will agree that the Dewan Negara can be reformed in the sense that it must assert itself. The law is not unsatisfactory. The law is quite okay. The main problem is this, that the bills come from the Dewan Rayat to Dewan Negara. Dewan Negara doesn't really examine them. In 55 years, no Dewan Rayat bill has ever been defeated. Now, that can change. There is no law which says, I know they can be bypassed after 30 days in the case of money bills, 1 year after 1 year for non-money bills. Bypassing may not always be easy. And the fact is that if they say no, that would make the Dewan Rayat think again. So the bill may be reformed. So I think this is administrative. It's not a problem of the law. Then increasing or decreasing the number of federal parliamentary constituencies. Can that be done? Yes, indeed, it can be done because the constituencies, number of constituencies is laid down by the law. Johor, for example, has 26, Sabah has 25, Sarawak 31, Poor Perlis has only 3. If you want to increase, you'll have to amend the Parlembagan in Article 46 Clause 2, and that will require a 2/3 majority of the total membership, which of course they don't have. At the moment they don't have. Can the state say no? When it comes to increasing the number of parliamentary seats, states have no say. The states have no say, it's a federal matter. Okay, next one is increasing or decreasing the number of state assembly constituencies. Is a 2/3 majority needed? Yes, 2/3 majority is needed, but in the state assembly. This is a state matter. The state constitution will have to be amended to increase or decrease the number of constituencies. Then next one is redelineation of federal and state constituency boundaries. So how do you draw the line? How does Sapute go? Does Kampong Abdullah Home come in Sapute, or is it combined with Bangsang? That is redelineation. That's not creating a new constituency. That is the job of the election commission, laying it before the Prime Minister, who then lays it before the Dewan Raya, and 2/3 majority is not needed. Is not needed. What is required is an absolute majority. Absolute means it must be 50% plus 1 of the total membership. In other words, you need 112 MPs. 111 is 50% of 222, 111 plus 1. So you need 112 MPs to agree. And this is perhaps the most objectionable part of our constituency delineation exercise, that the drawing of the lines has been basically left to a political vote. In many countries, actually, the boundaries commissions are independent. In some countries, the judiciary is involved in actually drawing of lines. So in this area, we need to have some more thinking. I'll just take half a more minute, Prof. I think as a result of this election, also the last election, federal-state relations are going to become more tense. Certainly, Sabah Sarawak will be asserting themselves because they were the real kingmakers this time. So Sabah Sarawak, I think, will obviously assert themselves much more, and rightly so. They have contributed to the formation of the government very significantly. Party leadership issues, they may come up. I know within MCA, MIC and others, Garakan, there are questions being raised. I don't know what the situation will be within UMNO. Elections are coming, so there is a danger or there is a possibility of party leadership issues. And finally, is an era of civil disobedience in the offing. I pray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this will not be so. I do support the right of people to demonstrate, to protest. I think protests are part of democracy, and that's a price we have to pay. But I think those who take part in democratic processes must consent to the results thereof. It's not right to take part in a process. If you win, fine, and if you don't win, then say, I want the system to go away. That's not right. I think in a democratic society, we must censor freely, but we must obey promptly. I'm afraid that's the price we have to pay of a democratic setup. Censor freely, but obey promptly. So I do hope that we can comply with the law. By all means, give police the 10 days notice, follow the instructions, protest, seek reform, but I think we must comply with the law. I had a portion on what does the future hold, but I'm afraid my time is up. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shad. So in a way, Dr. Shad has gone through quite in depth into the Constitution. So we complement that Constitution information with Dr. Chandra's point of view in terms of the political, the real politics of what's happening today. So, Dr. Chandra.
Assalamualaikum. Salam sejahtera, salam Malaysia. Good afternoon, everyone. Prof. Shad Faruqi, Rafli, staff of Yayasan Malaysia, staff of Just, friends. I'll focus upon the politics of the 13th general election and its aftermath. And within this focus, my emphasis will be upon ethnic relations. which is the concern of Yayasan nowadays, issues pertaining to national unity. One of the most obvious consequences of the 13th general election is this. We have a viable opposition. The 12th general election showed that the opposition had arrived. The 13th general election has legitimized the presence and the role of the opposition. And this is good for democracy. That we have a viable opposition, it's good for democracy. In order to check the powers of the ruling coalition, whoever is part of the ruling coalition, I think there is a need to check people in power, to speak truth to power, to check people in power. So the opposition in most countries plays that role of challenging the establishment, challenging the powers that be, and we can expect the opposition in Malaysia to do that. So this is something which is one of the most important consequences of the 13th generation. That this is there, it is permanent. I don't think it's going to change. 14th general election and the general elections after that. The opposition from now onwards is a viable force. Now, having said that, what is worrying about the opposition is this. I said a while ago that the opposition is a viable force, but I do not think that the opposition, as it is in a position to take over, to become the federal government. They may be able to rule at the state level, but I cannot see the opposition forming the federal government for one very important reason, that there is a huge ideological chasm that separates the parties in the opposition. It's all well and good to be together when you're fighting a common enemy, but in order to rule, you must have some ideological basis, and that is lacking as far as the opposition is concerned. PAS remains committed, as it has always been since it was established in the early 50s, remains committed to a hudud-oriented Islamic state. That's its notion of what an Islamic state is. The DAP, on the other hand, is a political party which is not only opposed to an Islamic state, it has made it very clear. The DAP is also estranged from, has very little rapport for the historical basis of this nation, its identity, its notion of what it is, which is very fundamental. And this separates the two political parties, and we must understand this. How are they going to work together and rule a multi-religious society like ours, where issues pertaining to religion and ethnicity will always be very significant in a society like ours? So this is, to my mind, a major issue confronting the opposition. It's strong, but it has not reached a point where it can convince all of us that it can form the government at the federal level because of this ideological chasm that separates these two parties. This is not true of the Alliance or the Barisan Nasional. It's not true of the Alliance. Why? Because before the Alliance came into being, and a lot of people don't remember this, of course. People in my generation, we have had to read and understand these things about the Alliance as a coalition. The Alliance achieved agreement on all the fundamental ethnic and religious issues before we came to power at the federal level in 1957. Why? Because if you look at the history of the Alliance, the three parties at that time, UMNO, MCA, MIC, you didn't have all the other parties. These parties agreed on a memorandum that was sent to the Reid Commission. The Reid Commission actually adopted nearly every proposal from the Alliance memorandum pertaining to rulers, to national language and the use of other languages, Islam, the place of the other religions, special position, legitimate interests of the other communities. These proposals came from the Alliance Memorandum. And in the end, what was accepted by the Reed Commission was actually this memorandum. Because the Reed Commission had a different view, for instance, of special position. They wanted a certain period for special position, 15 years. But the Alliance Memorandum, which included all these three parties, said, no, if you have a time frame for special position, it will lead to a lot of conflict when you approach that time limit. So don't have a time limit. It is something that we will review as we go along. This was the position of the Alliance. And there were other differences in relation to religion, for instance. The Alliance Memorandum wanted Islam as the religion of the Federation, but the rulers actually were not happy with it because they were the heads of religion within individual states. So there were differences of this sort. But in the end, what prevailed was the memorandum from the Alliance. So they agreed on all these issues. These were issues that they did not have to fight over after independence as an alliance. And later they had problems from outside, but they stood together as far as these issues are concerned. What am I referring to? The challenge from the PAP, from Lee Kuan Yew. After Singapore became part of Malaysia, between 64 and 65, these were really contentious issues about language, special position, and all the rest of it, but the alliance stood together on those issues. We have to keep that in mind. In the case of the opposition today, we don't have that consensus on fundamental religious and ethnic issues. Even after the Barisan was formed, officially in 1973, on all those issues, they were agreed because they adopted lock, stock and barrel what was agreed upon earlier on these ethnic issues relating to language, religion and all the rest of it. So there are no problems internally. The different parties that were part of the Barisan Nasional expanded after 1973. Keep that in mind. One other coalition that we had in Malaysia, they too had a basic ideological consensus, and that was the Socialist Front, which existed in the 60s, Parti Rakyat, Labour Party. What kept them together? Socialism. As their foundation. They were agreed on many of these issues, including some of the ethnic issues, but later they broke up partly because of the ethnic issues. It was the challenge of the Labour Party, which was basically Chinese, and the Socialist Front broke up actually. You know? But the point I'm making is you must have consensus on the fundamental ethnic and religious issues. Now, this is the problem with the opposition. And that leads me to the second point I want to make. In the last elections, what we witnessed was something very unique. It is not the fact that you had an opposition, a strong opposition. We had a strong opposition in 1959 actually. If you look at the results of the 1959 elections, 2 states fell to the opposition. People forget this. At that time there were only 11 states. Kelantan and Terengganu fell to pass in 1959. So you had a strong opposition, a strong Malay opposition. You also had a Chinese opposition in 1959. You had something like 12 seats that fell to the opposition. There were parties like the UDP and the Malayan Party and, you know, of course, the Socialist Front and so on. So we've always had a fairly viable opposition, and the opposition has always been multi-ethnic. So that is not unique. So let us not draw conclusions which are misplaced. We've always had a multi-ethnic opposition. So it is wrong to say that it was just a Chinese tsunami, because it has always been multi-ethnic. The opposition to the ruling coalition is always multi-ethnic. But what is unique about this election is that almost 90% of a particular community voted in a certain way. It has never happened in our history before. And we should not deny this. We should not give the impression that this is not significant. As a student of society and politics, it is something very significant. 90% of a particular community, the Chinese community, voted in a particular manner. Voted for the opposition, voted basically for a party that they perceived as the champion of their interests, as the champion of their rights. This is what they did in the 13th Revolution. This has never happened before. And this is something that we have to explore in general, as far as ethnic relations are in this country. This is a product of a sentiment which has been with the Chinese community for a very long time. Right from the 50s, actually. If you look at the citizenship issue of the 1950s, a certain sentiment. In the 60s, it was language. In the 70s, after the amendments to the Constitution on issues pertaining to language and other things, it changed. It became education and the economy, a certain sentiment linked to the Chinese community. And of course, as we move along, you can see that religion is also becoming more and more significant. The point I'm making is that there has always been a feeling amongst a segment of the Chinese in the past, a segment of the Chinese, that the system is unfair. It is unjust. Why? Because basically of special position. Special position and the whole question of the Malay position, they felt that it's unfair to the Chinese community. Now that sentiment, which was a sentiment that was confined to a segment of the Chinese community, has today become very pervasive. This is what has happened, especially after the 12th general election. After 2008, it has become very, very strong. And in fact, in some of the things I wrote immediately after the 12th general election, I pointed this out, that this sentiment is going to become very, very powerful and will express itself in the 13th general election. That for a lot of Chinese, unfair system, we're not treated well, we're second-class citizens, we're marginalized. And after the 12th general election, the feeling that maybe we can change this situation. Why did they begin to feel this way? First, because in the 12th general election, something happened which had not happened before as far as the Chinese electorate is concerned. Winning Penang, an opposition party winning Penang was not new. The Gerakan, when it won Penang in 1969, was an opposition party. It won 16 out of the 24 seats in the 1969 elections. It was an opposition party. It was largely Chinese, though its overall head was a Malay, and it had a couple of Malay candidates in Penang, but it was basically a party that was supported by the Chinese and led to a great extent by the Chinese, the Gerakan opposition party. But in the 12th general election, what was different was this, that the DAP was able to come to power in Perak and Sabah. It did not happen before. And in the case of Perak, it was in government, it was in power for 11 months in Perak. And it was the DAP that was calling the shots in Perak. It had 18 seats out of 31. 18 out of 31. It was actually the party in Perak. The Menteri Besar, because of the state constitution, was Malay, Muslim, Shafi'i school and all the rest of it, as required by the Perak state constitution. And in Selangor, the DAP also did well. It had very significant representation in the state exco. Menteri Besar was from Parti Keadilan, but it was actually very, very important in Selangor. Not as powerful as in Perak for the 11 months that they were in power. For the first time, the Chinese realized that they could come to power in Malay majority states, and they could call the shots. And they could call the shots. Even if you have a Malay, Menteri Besar. And this, I think, is something that gave them a great deal of confidence. The Chinese, between the 12th general election and the 13th general election. In the 13th general election, they would be able to carry this agenda forward. This is the sentiment. There were a couple of other factors that helped push this sentiment forward. What were those factors? Yet another factor was this. You had Malay leaders who in the 12th general election already began using that language, but it became more prominent, more significant after the 12th general election. We're talking about getting rid of Malay supremacy. We're talking about getting rid of racial discrimination In fact, those are the words that we used. You look at the Pakatan Rakyat Manifesto. It talks about eliminating racial discrimination without saying what it is, which is why I said it's a very cunning way of addressing this issue, because if you were prepared to say what it is, getting rid of racial discrimination, it would have been much better. But we don't clarify it, we just say we'll eliminate racial discrimination. For a lot of non-Malays, what that would have meant was going to get rid of special position in their minds. Those listening to you, we'll get rid of special position, because that to them is the epitome of discrimination in the country. But if you asked Anwar Ibrahim, who was the one going around talking about this, getting rid of racial discrimination, he would say, no, I support the Constitution, I support 153, which is what he has said when challenged on this issue. What I meant is that he was getting rid of the NEP. But then when you tell him, the NEP is not around anymore. Technically, it's not around. We all know that. The NEP ended in 1990. So he would say, yes, the NEP is not around. So that's what I meant. I'll get rid of the NEP. You see how easy it would have been to get out of this, given the sort of personality he is. That would have been his response. I meant the NEP. And then you turn around and tell him, look, the spirit of the NEP is still there, which is the policy that was adopted by the National Consultative Council in 1990, that though the NEP is not there, the two goals of the NEP would remain, which is one, eradicating poverty, irrespective of ethnicity, and number two, restructuring society so that ethnicity is not linked to economic function. I was in that council, the National Consultative Council. This was what was agreed upon. Now you ask him, are you objecting to these two? He'll say, of course not, because there's no reason to object to getting rid of poverty, irrespective of ethnicity, or restructuring society so that there is no link between ethnicity and economic function, which is actually a product of our colonial history. So you see, it was very easy for him to wriggle out of this mess he had got into by talking about getting rid of racial discrimination if he had been challenged. But given the level of political IQ of Malaysian society, he got away with it. Because our political IQ is I think one of the lowest in the world. No doubt about it. I've said this many times, it is one of the lowest in the world. The political IQ of the average Malaysian. And I always compare and contrast the political IQ of Malaysian society to, say, Cuba. If you look at that society and the level of political consciousness, it's just amazing. Even very, very ordinary Cubans. Here, it is so low that people don't really ask questions about things like this, and you allow leaders to get away with all sorts of things. And from both sides of the divide, whether they're in the ruling coalition or the opposition, they can get away with all sorts of things because no one really challenges them and asks them questions of this sort. So, for the DAP, for Anwar, for others, this is the big thing in the elections. That, they are going to bring about a more equal society, and equality was actually the rallying cry, the battle cry of the DAP at that time in the 13th general election, that they were going to bring about equality, get rid of all the inequalities and so on in our society. Now, if you look at what had happened in the actual polls, the Chinese as a whole responded to this because they saw this as their chance. Which is why if you look at the slogan, Ubah, change. And the second one, I always have a bit of a problem with it because I know it is wrong bahasa. The bahasa is wrong. It should be kali inilah. But it became, what was it?